Good? Yeah, I'll take that as a yes. So apologies for the technical difficulties, but we didn't really want to eat into our time because this is such an important discussion. So you know what, slides or no slides, we're going to make this happen, right? So thank you for coming today to cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. Who is responsible for making the call in marketing and advertising? My name is Angela Yang. I am the very humbled and honored moderator of today's session. I am representing T3, which is a woman-owned independent agency located here in Austin, New York, and San Fran. Creative strategy, innovation, building brands, and also product design. That is my last plug for the day, I promise. But before we start, just to clear off some just ground rules, today's conversation can be very sensitive, and we understand that. Not everyone in this room is going to agree on some of the topics that we landed on today, but please just everyone keep a respectful nature. And at the same time too, we've got now less than an hour to tackle and scratch the surface of a topic in which we know there's a lot to unpack. So the goal of today is for you to walk away feeling like you have some insight, new perspectives, and things that you can take back to your organization to be more responsible marketers. Does that sound good? Okay, I'm done talking. I'm gonna let the fabulous panelists introduce themselves. They were handpicked for this panel because of their diverse views and the different perspectives that they come and bring to the table. All right.
Hi, y'all. I'm Tanya Tarr. I'm at Nerdette on Twitter. That's Nerdette. I live here in Austin, Texas, and I worked in politics and campaigns for 17 years. And in the last few years, I've been doing a lot of corporate-facing work now. I also write for Forbes about negotiation and equal pay, and I'm super excited to be here.
Oh, that's loud. Oh, no, it was fun. I sound good. I'm Chaz Moore. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Austin Justice Coalition. We are a black local grassroots and black female now led grassroots organization that addresses criminal justice reform, policy reform here on the local level. And we also have a Saturday school program that is for kids of color and by mentors of color. And we'll talk a little bit about that more later. But I also want to say if I offend you, it's not on purpose, and I'm only trying to help you learn some stuff. So this is a safe space, and I'm not here to be an asshole on purpose. But if you do feel offended, you can talk to me after.
I'm Tanya Dua, another Tanya, two Tanyas, go Tanyas.
Best name in the world.
I am the media and advertising reporter at Business Insider, senior reporter. I've been covering the industry for 5 years. I'm usually the one moderating, so the tables have turned today, and I look forward to a very insightful conversation.
Great. Perfect, and let there be light. This is awesome. So those are our handles, and also just if you want to tweet some of the good tidbits coming out of this, it will be #AppreciateCulture. So, all right, well, let's open up first by talking about cultural appropriation versus appreciation, and what does it actually mean? What are the definitions around those? I think a lot of us can go out there, Google, and find that appropriation means when a dominant culture takes something from a subordinate culture and tries to make it their own or tries to use it in some way or fashion, right? But we know that lately, especially in the last couple of 10 years, actually an article that was published by Refinery 29 by Connie Wang actually said that the definition of cultural appropriation today feels like everything is considered appropriative, right? So I'd love for the panelists to actually go through and talk through how they delineate the two themselves. Chaz, I want to start with you just because, look at his shirt. What does your shirt say? What are your thoughts on it and how cultural appropriation applies for today?
So, I purposely wore this shirt because I think it, in a very brief manner, wraps up everything we talked about over the last couple months. Just quite frankly and honestly, cultural appropriation is when you appreciate the culture itself, when you appreciate the food, the music, the textiles, the clothing, but you don't appreciate the actual people where the clothes and the food and the textiles come from, right? So as a black American, I see it every day. So many people in mainstream media, whether it be rappers or Kylie Jenner, they try so hard to look like black men and sound like black men and women, and they take so much of our culture, but they never pay homage to where they got the idea from, or where they got the look from, where they got the fashion from, right? When you see this young white woman on the red carpet wearing Bantu braids, right? Like if you know anything about Bantu braids or braids in general, that comes all the way back from Africa, right? And I think Tanya said it. I don't want to take your quotable, but Tanya said, culture is meant to be shared, but we have to be careful with that. It's also like meant to be respected and pay homage to the people that we got the culture from. So that's what my shirt is all about. It's like, hey, you can appreciate the culture, but you also have to respect it. You can't just take it. You can't just rape it and not give credit to where it's due. And I think the people that we all, for the most part, offend within that lane is our Native American, indigenous people in this particular country, and of course, indigenous people from the continent of Africa. So,
I would agree with that, and I would say there's two ways of thinking about it to expand on what you just said. It's all about credit and acknowledgement. You can be appreciating a culture, but if you don't acknowledge where it comes from, you're disrespecting it, you're appropriating it, and you're not being fair. I was born and raised in India. Turmeric lattes are all the rage. Guess what? My grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother has been drinking that with milk for generations. And it's not turmeric, it's turmeric. It's annoying, it gets frustrating. And I'm totally okay with Starbucks, creating their own new line and furthering their business, as long as they acknowledge where it comes from. There's my problem with cultural appropriation in America today is that no one acknowledges, the origin story of where things come from, and I think that is a first step towards even addressing the conversation.
So, can I start? I know it's a slide, but so. As we've been preparing for this panel, it's kind of made me laugh a lot because I'm kind of playing the role of the capitalist, which is totally not how I think of myself. But as we've been, thinking about different proof points, what are examples of appropriation? And let me actually take a step back here for a second too, because I actually write a lot of advice columns when people ask me about how to negotiate, and I feel like appropriation and apologies, which is really the unspoken thing here, right? How do people apologize for screwing up? That in and of itself is a cultural negotiation. And I also feel like we are living in a time where advice implies some level of hierarchy, and it's hard to give good advice, right? So I'm a huge fan of questions. I feel like good focusing questions can help you navigate yourself in any context you might find yourself, and it helps you surface what you think and know to be true, right? So here are some questions that I would suggest up on the slides to help be your own personal compass when you're trying to figure out, right? Am I appropriating something or not? And I'm going to make a big assumption here and assume that most of you are here because maybe you don't want to appropriate. Right? That's not something you want to do, that maybe you do want to join us in really appreciating the richness that culture provides for us. Because yes, culture is meant to be shared. It's how we relate to one another. It's an expression of our human experience and our human soul. And so the first question I ask myself, and by the way, on Twitter, my pinned tweet this morning, I went through and collected a whole bunch of resources from many different perspectives, race, gender, LGBTQ, disabled folks. And I just put it in a long thread, and it's pinned at the top of my profile on Twitter. So if you are looking for more resources, you can find it there. But my friend Jamia Wilson, who heads up the Feminist Press, is an incredible writer and speaker. And she wrote this story in the New York Times a few years ago about a gift that she received from some women in Saudi Arabia. And she was trying to figure out, is it appropriating their culture for me to wear this jacket that's made out of this fabric that's really important to these women who are feminists in Saudi Arabia? And they told her the story around the fabric that the coat was made out of, and she realized after she talked with them and understood, okay, this is the story and the origin and the culture and the history of this object that I'm wearing. And that was what she does to figure out, am I appropriating something or not? So my first question is to ask yourself, is this thing I'm interacting with, whether it's an object or a symbol or a practice, is it sacred to somebody? And the reason why this question is powerful is it's not so much about shame or not. It actually is more about how you think about and how you would treat something that's sacred. So my hope is that after you walk out of this panel, that sticks with you, because I feel like that's a really good compass. The second question is, does it cause harm? So like another example, proof point, is the chopped beef sandwich in Harlem that someone, a white journalist, discovered. And it's kind of a little bit of a harm, well, I shouldn't say harmless. So the issue here about, does this cause harm? Does it cause economic harm? Does it cause spiritual harm? Does it cause cultural harm? And in this case, I'll give you the really quick skinny on the economic side of this. So the chopped cheese sandwich in Harlem costs like $4 or $5, and for that community, which is working class folks, that sandwich would be 2 meals for people. And then a white journalist found it and thought it was really great, and Whole Foods starts making it, and then the guy running the bodega who's making the chopped cheese sandwiches raises their prices to $10 per sandwich, right? So now all of a sudden, the people who live in that community are priced out of something that they relied on for literal sustenance. So that's another kind of way of just being your own self-compass. Does this cause harm to somebody if I do this? And then the other question is, did I do the work, and can I tell the story? Because the reason why culture is meant to be shared is because we get to tell the story of the people that created that object or that practice or that belief system. And if we can tell the story of where these things came from in a respectful way, then we're elevating those people and those cultures, right? And then I just feel like you're going to be a lot less prone to being accused of appropriating something, right? Because you're really treating something as sacred.
Oh, wait. So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. So this is a little case that I like to show. In 2017, there was an article in the New York Times that was written called "In Defense of Cultural Appropriation." And then it was basically saying that if brands and advertisers, marketers today want to be more inclusive, want to showcase different communities and recognize them in their advertising itself, that appropriation is a little bit of a byproduct of that. It's a side effect of that. That sometimes it happens and that it's okay. Whereas this side, actually NPR clapped back about a week later and said that, in fact, cultural appropriation is not defensible in any way. So I would love to know from your side, as brands and as marketers, we're trying to recognize minorities, people of quote unquote other. How do we do this without completely freezing ourselves out? Tough question.
Well, I mean, so I think about fashion a lot. And I think about, there's sort of like grades to that too, right? So like folks in fashion and advertising sometimes too, they'll talk about reference when you're referencing something else. You're referencing another period of art or another artist. And there's acknowledgement there, right? But if a reference isn't done the right way, it might be considered inspired by, right? Which is another version of that. And then if it kind of seems not as well done, not as well crafted, it could be like imitation, which is a little bit of a knockoff. And even sometimes art will be imitation on purpose. But then the sort of last part of that spectrum is intellectual theft, right? And so again, it goes back to this thing, does it cause harm? And I feel like when we're inspired by other people, and we can, again, bring that respect element in, you're probably going to steer clear of appropriation. It's when we think that we've decided that we've discovered something that's been around for a long time or other people have done, like that's where the appropriation comes off, right? Like if a musician says like, oh, I'm never inspired by the Beatles, and they're like a pop singer, it's like, really? Really? Yeah, okay,
So I think if a company or organization says, appropriation is just going to happen, to me, that automatically means you don't have enough true diversity within your leadership or decision-making somewhere following rank, right? When you look at Gucci, when you look at all the things that have been happening lately, that lets me know that you do not have enough, like, real, and I'm saying real diversity because it's such a buzzword, even here at South by Southwest, and especially here in Austin, where black people make up 6%, but we always talk about inclusion and equity and diversity. But if you want, not even if you want, if you have diverse voices and diverse backgrounds in leadership positions, and you know, like the file and rank, things won't get out the door that is offensive and offensive to not only people, but to like whole cultures and communities, right? So for anybody that's saying, oh, well, the appropriation just happened with then I added our marketing rollout, that means you don't have enough, probably don't have enough women, probably don't have enough black women in leadership, you don't have enough women of color in leadership, and you definitely don't have enough people of color at all that's checking and doing the balancing of whatever ad rollouts or anything you're doing. So to me, that's total BS. Like, appropriation just doesn't happen, but it is something that we allow, right? As a society, it's something that we allow. Like, and I don't want to be too long, but like, we allow all these isms, right? Like, every one of us in here is guilty of the homeless population that's one block over while we're all having fun at South by, right? Like, we literally pass these people up and act like we don't see them in the name of fun and free tacos and free beer. Like we're all responsible for the fact that women don't get paid the same for doing the same jobs that men are doing. We're all responsible for the injustices that happen in our criminal justice system because we allow it, we don't stand up, we don't speak up enough. So just like this with cultural appropriation, with the Gucci thing or anything you want to name, like, people literally look at this, may feel some type of way about it, and just don't say anything. And next thing you know, it's on Instagram, and now we're all reacting to it when it's too late, when it never should have got out the door.
I think, you know, having covered advertising for so long, you can clearly tell when the intention is right versus when it's not. If you remember the Super Bowl from 2 years ago, just after the inauguration of President Donald Trump, an overwhelming number of brands took stances on very divisive issues and, you know, talked about racism, talked about immigration, you know, very polarizing issues. Not a lot of them received any backlash for that. But then that same year, there was Pepsi, and, you know, we never tire about talking about that ad because it was just such a huge misstep where they were not only appropriating a movement, but also a culture. And, you know, that's the reason we're still talking about it. You know, they probably learned their lessons, but to your point, you know, no one in Pepsi probably then, that was an in-house ad. So that talks about diverse, you know, perspectives and, you know, to the case of having ad agencies, to another, you know, point. But there was no one probably within Pepsi that raised their voice and said, hey, we are belittling a movement. We are belittling Black Lives Matter, you know? So to me, the intention is there. And when brands have the right intention, which is aligning themselves to causes that matter to their consumers, but they're living it from within, it's visible, versus a Pepsi when it's very clearly something that's not right intentioned.
Yeah. They did put Cardi B, though, on the last Pepsi ad, which is like pretty awesome. It was not, there was no appropriation there. It was pretty legit. But.
Trying to win back some fans,
Yeah,
it sounds
definitely.
like. Okay, so Chaz, I actually want to pick at something you just said, so bear with me a little bit. But it sounds like a part of what we're saying is that there needs to be more diversity at the table in order to stop these Kylie Jenner moments from happening, the Gucci moment from happening, this Pepsi thing from happening. But is it fair for someone that is the minority or the person of color to always be the one calling out the problem? Would you argue that it's everyone's responsibility to do that?
So, and I'm gonna try to be as quaint as possible saying this. I don't think it's fair to hire minorities to do that dirty work, right? Like, I'm not interested in companies hiring the black woman or the black trans man or trans person to be the equity and inclusion director. Like, I could care less about that. I do know if we go out and intentionally hire somebody to be, like, I am interested in hiring the black woman or the woman of color to be the marketing director, right? Because now she probably has an equity lens on her job. But I'm not interested in any company that's going out looking for a person of color or a person that has, you know, this diverse background and grew up tough to do like the equity lens work. Like, I'm not interested in that. To me, that's BS because, and I've said this on the phone, it's something I'm really passionate about because I see it in Austin so much, right? We created a whole equity office, and guess what that whole staff looks like? I'll save you 3 seconds of your life. It's all black people. I'm not interested in that. Like the people that should be doing equity work and readjusting is white cisgendered men, right? Those are the people that need to realign and refocus and get their shit together. Like, it's not my job to tell black women or women in general to fix sexism and fix all these things. No, I need to do the searching for that, right? So if we're gonna hire people in real positions, like actual serious positions, like, you know, to be a director, to be marketing manager, to be whatever, let's do that in the name of diversity. But don't bring on this little black woman or this little black boy or this little yellow or brown person to just be your equity person that has very little voice within the company. Because to me, that's BS.
Yeah.
I think companies often, pat themselves on the back for having, oh, here we have a person of color, or we have a woman in this boardroom meeting, and that is such a short-term perspective and view. I personally don't think it's offensive when someone asks me to do the gut check in the room. But I also think it's important for me to form allies. And how do I form those allies? By tapping into the majority that hasn't had any form of historical or cultural kind of power over me. I think allies are very important to further this. Like I said, I'm not offended when someone asks me, oh, hey, we're going to write a story about this. Is this culturally appropriate? I have no problem in telling them when it is and when it's not. But I also think it's as important for me to engage with the majority in a dialogue as much as possible.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just poll the room. How many of you have felt like you needed to be that gut check in the room? Anybody? How many people didn't mind being the gut check? Okay, so it seems like a pretty good even, but sometimes it isn't the same for everybody. But I would love to ask Tanya too, because we've been talking about this as well. Chaz, you said you're not impressed when there's 50 black men in the room. You want the cisgender white males to be the ones that are accountable. But Tanya, I know we've talked about how this conversation could go very dark into this negative hole.
Yeah.
But like, how would you say that you can create a culture of trust in that way?
Yeah, so there's this, I'm going to go off on a tangent, but stay with me, y'all. I promise I'm going to come back. Y'all know Gallagher? He smashed the watermelon, right? I see a couple of, and some people are like, I have no idea who you're talking about. I'm about to butcher one of his lines. So he always had this joke where he said, we're the result of hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. Maybe we should act like it. And if you think about it, we are the end result of all that evolution. And we live at a time where things can be customized in an extraordinary way. Human beings have never had this opportunity before. Human beings have never had this wealth of information and cultures and time and people to benefit from. And so there is the part of the conversation we've talked a lot about how some of the structural changes aren't fast enough or they aren't meaningful enough. But I would offer that we actually have a huge opportunity in front of us to literally build the world we all want to live in. And I think that, so in publishing, I noticed they've started doing this thing called sensitivity editors. Angela, you and I have talked a lot about this, where maybe there is a place for us to actually create an entirely new job, and that job be a cultural editor, or a cultural, what were we using? I can't even remember now. It's all flying out of my head.
Cultural
editor.
sensitivity consultant as well.
Right, yeah, or that, I do a lot of work with HR directors. We could build out a whole curriculum around this to help people be more intelligent about this. Okay, so you stole my thunder. Now I'm going to steal your thunder. All right, so we were talking before we got up here, and Chaz made this great point about how, when your iPhone reboots or your computer reboots, and it just kind of chugs along, and then you get the spinny wheel of death, and you're like, oh God, what's going on? And I feel like we need that as a community and as a society. Our operating system needs to be rebooted. And what do I mean by that? We don't think about etiquette anymore. We don't think about business etiquette or social etiquette. It's all been thrown out the window. And that is an opportunity for all of us. That's really exciting. I think of etiquette as the rules that we've all decided and agreed upon. And it really is like an operating system. And so something simple like choosing pronouns. I know that makes some people really mad. It makes me super excited. And let me tell you why it makes me super excited. Because I teach people how to negotiate with one another. And I think I made that Gallagher, which you guys obviously are not Gallagher fans. I thought I was going to get way more laughs, but you know, it's the end of the day, and you're probably like, oh man, what's going on? But you know, when you use someone else's language that they've told you they want to be called by that name, it's a big deal, because you are communicating respect in that very act without really even saying it explicitly. And I know when I've traveled internationally, or even in big cities here in the US, I can say, hi, how are you, thank you, and is that so, in about 12 languages now. And to see people's face light up, especially, you know, I'm the child of immigrants, and when I say that to somebody who's in the US who's an immigrant, and their face lights up, and they're so happy because now I've made a connection with them through that choice, it's a really big deal. Now, that's on an individual level. Now, let's think about commercially. Right? Because that's why we're all here, right? Marketers and advertising. And again, on that pinned tweet on my profile, I posted a bunch of research. Listen, you're going to be, if you are a marketer or an advertiser, you're going to be leaving trillions of dollars on the table when you don't make choices that help people feel seen and heard. Point blank, period, full stop. In 2019, this year, millennial consumers will outpace baby boomers. They will be the largest marketing segment in the United States. And I think in 2030 is when Gen X's will supersede baby boomers. And if there's one thing we know about millennial consumers, they want to make economic choices that reflect their personal values. And so we're literally living through a time where all of this stuff is being turned over. It's not okay to be racist. It's not okay to be sexist. It's not okay to rip off somebody else's culture. Right? And so we're rapidly coming into a time where if you do that, you're going to lose consumers. So hopefully we want to do the right thing because it's the morally right thing to do. But if you're dealing with a decision maker who really doesn't want to hear about that stuff, there's an argument, a very clear argument to be made in the numbers. There's another great company called, I think it's a nonprofit actually, called Just Capital. And they look at things like diversity in leadership and what the numbers look like. And the business case now is very, very clear. When you have a more diverse leadership structure, you are going to do better with ROI, and you literally have those consumers baked into your staffing structures. And so those folks can be the ones that can help you appreciate culture, right? Because there's so much I can't wait to get to the other side of this, which is when we can have that party. It's really a party that we all should be invited to.
So I mean, this is another kind of contrarian question, but do we think that just having more diverse people in an organization is the antidote to cultural appropriation in advertising? Or is there more to it?
Well, that's one hell of a question.
I'm having an Oprah moment.
What do you think, Chaz?
And, I mean, I could be completely wrong, but I think based on my experiences in like the work I do, which is all social justice rooted, when I've added different perspectives to the table, my organization has gotten better. I've gotten better as a man. I've gotten better as just a human. So I think when you have different perspectives and different lived experiences and things that are outside of your comfort box, you just seem to do better. So again, you know, I think it's, I agree. I think it's one thing to have, you know, people of color be the gut check, but I also think if we just start intentionally, right, when we talk about equity, which a lot of us don't really understand that word, if we start intentionally going out and looking for people of color, and not because we want to be better, if we just go out intentionally, hire people of color that are qualified to do the job, you will get better. Like that's just the way life works. And again, I have to, maybe because, you know, I have 6 black women that are part of my 8-team leadership, I have to vouch for black women, even though it may not be that many in the room, but when you have black women at the decision-making table, everything within that organization, around that organization, blossoms beautifully, right? And I have to say that again in the name of equity, and I'll shut up, because when we're talking about cultural appreciation and appropriation, until we start appreciating the people at the bottom, then we're never gonna go anywhere, right? And that's why I hate the word equality, because it's such a BS, another BS word. Equity is when you lift up the people at the bottom first, right? And I don't care what column you look in, except college graduates, right? But any other like field, like when you look at the moms that are dying just for giving birth, it's black women. When you look at the number of women or people in jail, the second group behind black men is black women. When you look at the people that are suffering the most in any economic bubble in this country, it's black women, right? So until we start appreciating the black woman, we'll be having this panel at South by Southwest for the next 20 years, and that's something I'm not particularly interested in. It's like, how do we just get better now? And I think we do that by building a bigger table for more diverse seats and more diverse voices.
Kind of a contrary point to that is that obviously having more diverse people and giving more people voice is not a silver bullet. And that's why, I go back to the fact that education and having those conversations and forming those, ally relationships is equally important, because if the people at the top or the majority aren't going to support you, no matter how hard you try, you're just going to be talking into the darkness. And so that's why I don't mind being that gut check, and neither should anyone that considers or is considered a minority, including women, including people of color.
Yeah. So to hit on that point too, so we talked about individuals, we talked about bringing people to the table, making that table bigger. How about media? How about organizations? I mean, and Tanya D, this is a question for you, is like, where do you feel like media plays a role in gatekeeping? And how do you believe that it influences what people believe is appropriate versus not?
Of course, I mean, one of the key reasons we exist is to hold everyone accountable, and that's the first job of any journalism company, any media company. So I do absolutely agree that we play a huge role in being the gatekeepers. But we were talking about this earlier as well, where there's an argument to be made where, at what point do you become complicit in kind of aggravating the tensions further? So if you are a media company and you're writing about backlash to cultural appropriation, are you doing it for the clicks? But then if you're not doing it, are you disregarding something? The way I look at it is our audience is what we serve, first and foremost. And if this is something that's going to be of interest to them, then we will write about it. And you can see that in terms of numbers. Now, in terms of organizations, I can speak to what Business Insider is doing internally. So on the editorial side, we have kind of the spreadsheet of people and topics or topics that they're well versed in. So for instance, I grew up in India. I know about South Asian culture. So if anyone's ever writing a story and they need someone to vet it, I'm on that list. There's hundreds of people on that list. So kind of people from the LGBTQ, like people that identify as one of the members, people of color, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing. Two, I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know that overall, women form 50-something% of our employee base. And yeah, while that is a great stat, when you actually come to break it down in the leadership positions, there's not that many of us. So now that's the next step we're looking at, right? So when I say companies shouldn't just pat themselves on the back, yes, that's an achievement, but is it enough that we're 52% women? No, we can do better. And the third thing that Business Insider is doing is again, creating those safe spaces for having these conversations. And these are organic things that came up. So we have a bunch of kind of employee-led groups that have cropped up in, I would say, the last 2 years. One of them is HUE, which is people of color group, and it's not just open to people of color. Anyone that wants to participate in it can go in it. We have a women's group that I'm a part of, and we have a rainbow group.
Nice.
So how do you, I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions, but how do we start really building organizations, marketing departments, and partnering with our clients, even maybe from agency to brand side, and start being able to have those conversations and start being able to get more knowledgeable around what is appropriative or not? Like, what are the steps that we can actually take here in this room today?
Start a diversity inclusion writer in Hollywood. They do that a lot. We're talking about organizations, but I do hope everyone, if you're not already trying to do this in your life, form your own inclusion writer for yourself, right? Seek out voices that you aren't normally, are different from your experience. I think that's part of it. I think a lot of organizations are. Respectfully, I disagree with you, Chaz. I think it's pretty cool when organizations decide to have a diversity and inclusion effort within their organization. I think it does elevates that as a value for their organization. This is a little bit off topic, but related. Can I share this? So it's always fascinating to me when we actually look at the people that make up our organization. They are always our greatest asset. And I'm always looking for the business case where doing the right thing actually ends up being profitable. And Jennifer Brown, who writes a lot about D&I, she wrote once about Macy's. So Macy's has a set of employee resource groups that they have. And one of them is a Latina ERG. And the executives went to the ERG and said, hey, if you guys ever have any marketing ideas, let us know. And so the Latinas at Macy's said, yeah, you know what, actually we did have an idea. Why not have a quinceañera charge card? Because quinceañeras we have any Latinas, Latinx folks like myself? I'm half, right? Quinceañera is a big deal, right? It's basically prom, and except you're coming out into society and you get to look like a cupcake, one of those dresses with all the, so we spend a lot of money. And so as a result of a recommendation by the Latina ERG, they said, okay, we'll pilot this. So they had a Macy's charge card just around quinceañera. They rolled it out in 36 stores, and they cleared $500,000 worth of retail in that first year. So if you think about it, so this happened probably 7 or 8 years ago. But if this happened and wasn't handled correctly in the media, someone found out about it and then they threw it into the media, I could actually see someone saying how dare they appropriate, Latinx culture? But in fact, it's not appropriative, right? Because it came from the Latino workers who had insight, who had very natural insight into that community. And then they realized, hey, there's an economic opportunity here. And the charge card is particularly genius because you can track the sales. Right? So now we have all of those pieces of evidence to show that, in fact, when you're able to elevate that insight, that it can turn into, money. Here I am, a little capitalist. Who knew? Crazy.
I think you can make a conscious effort to hire and play from places outside of the usual places you go to, right? So speaking from coming from a media company, it's very easy to go to journalism school career expos, but it's equally important to have those partnerships and relationships with groups that represent, people of color. So there's the National Association of Black Journalists, there's a National Association of Hispanic Journalists, there's a South Asian Journalists Association. I've been very proactive with this in terms of going up to my managing editors and hiring managers and saying, hey, these are the people we should be talking to. So obviously that's the first step, but that's an important step. And, as recruiters in a company, that's something you can keep in mind.
Chaz, what do you think? What can people do to actually help clear the way and make people more appreciative versus appropriate?
So I don't want anybody that is over the D&I at your company to get rid of this because I said it. But again, I just have to speak, my own truth to power. I would just much prefer we could get to a place in society to where we didn't have to have the diversity and inclusion sector of the company, and we just were, right? Like, just be diverse, just be inclusive, just don't be racist, don't be sexist. Like, just put it, like, it should be a cultural practice within your organization, within your company, whatever you got. And I think that's what I like about us. Like, we try and we educate ourselves as much as possible. Because I do want to say this, and I respectfully disagree. We want to create a society, the world I live in, where, one, we don't have allies, we have, accomplices and co-conspirators, because an ally is just somebody that puts the sign on their door like Black Lives Matter. Accomplice or co-conspirator is somebody that's actually going to fight that fight with you. But I also want to live in a world where I don't need the dominant culture for my survival or for anything, right? And I think it's okay. I think that's okay to say. But just be better. Just be inclusive. Be diverse. Do the hard work that you have to do internally to not be the person that the main narrative is telling us to be, right? Like, because we live in a culture. The one thing I hate about American society is that it teaches us that we are all individuals, which is the biggest lie. It's the biggest misconception. Like, we're all connected. 6 degrees of separation is something I think we all believe in, most of us in this room. So you will be a complete fool to think that the Black struggle, that the Latino struggle, that the LGBTQIA plus struggle is not your struggle as well, right? So I'm just interested in knowing that my struggle and my liberation, more importantly, my liberation is tied to the liberation of everybody in this room, right? Maybe I went too deep, but that's how I'm feeling.
No, but I mean, I know I'm just the moderator here, but if I may, I do think it's interesting because we keep talking about, I mean, I hate to say it, the white man, and, they need to be asking questions. But I will say on my side of the house, I do think as a minority woman in the industry, it is also our responsibility to drive conversation around it and to make it okay to ask questions. Yeah. Because I can only imagine how terrifying it is to go into a room and try to make a recommendation around, let's do this, Lunar New Year post around this culture because it's happening and we want to be inclusive. And to have to ask that question and to have to ask around you, is this okay? I think those are really hard conversations to have. So I think us sitting on this panel, us out there, need to be open to that and to be able to answer those questions too. Because to your point, we're all in it together, and whatever impacts us is going to impact everyone else too.
I'm so glad you said Lunar New Year too, because when people say Chinese New Year, I'm like, oh, but I'm Korean and I appreciate it too.
Okay, so I know that there's probably a lot of questions out there.
Yeah.
So
Can I mention something really quickly
Sure.
too? So again, another resource. Melanie Hobson did a great TED Talk about being racially brave. So if you're looking for another reference point, that's a good one. I admire the heart and spirit of what you're talking about, Chaz. I also, worked in politics for 17 years, and not everybody can take that jump, although you are a brilliant futurist, so I join you in that future vision. But, taking baby steps is okay too. I think, being curious and trying to maintain curiosity as you go through this process. And one of my mentors too talks about the importance when you're having these difficult conversations to be okay in going slow. Right, and going slow and taking your time, asking lots of questions. Tons of resources online, but also to be brave in how you make friends and how you find friends to help you through that process as well.
So just as one last reminder too, I want to put this back up here. A very wise man once told me, you share one thing one time, you share it again, because it sticks in people's minds. So always ask yourself, is this sacred? Does this cause harm? Do I do the work to know enough? Can I tell the story? So I think if anything you walk away today with, just remember those questions too. So, all right, let's open up for questions.
First. I was going to ask Mr. Moore, do you find these diversity and inclusion groups not beneficial to the communities of the people going in because you're exposing this one person, they're bringing back a new role to their community. I'm an investments analyst and I'm the only person in my community that's an investments analyst. So I'm encouraging other younger girls to get into it that are also here. So do you find that benefit to be negligible?
So for the people that didn't hear, and correct me if I'm just trying to wrap up the question quick, does D&I efforts benefit the community?
Yes, are there external benefits?
So, and again, I'm speaking from Austin, right? Austin has been completely raped of its black community. So I'll give you a prime example of what happens in Houston. In Austin. We've been completely relocated from the east side, which is where in 1928, the city of Austin said this is where blacks and Latinos have to stay. Austin became a cool city, gentrification happened, University of Texas happened, we all get pushed out. So now the University of Texas is trying to, and I believe it comes from a good place, they're trying to like get better and be better, so they do these D&I efforts in the community. But for the black community, that I know, that I speak to, it's such a micro and macro aggression to keep asking me about the problems that you have caused, right? So like that's why I respectfully disagree with some of the things the lady said, because I think even for me so when I get asked to speak at like some of these companies, and I'm not gonna say them because I want to get invited back, but if you're only inviting me in February to talk about equity and equality, I have a problem with that. Like, if you're not inviting me back in June or October or any other month to talk about equity and inclusion and diversity, I know what you're doing, and I can't really respect that. So I think some companies and some communities may be doing it right, but what I see in Austin is literally a community that has been erased, that is completely forgotten about. Even with South, I have such a love-hate relationship with this conference because it completely undermines what has happened to the black community in this city. And then we try our best to, they have people like me on the panel to say we're doing diversity and inclusion, when it's some families on the east side that you literally have torn their houses down that should probably be speaking instead of me, right? I hope that answered your question. All right.
Yeah.
I hope this isn't too personal, but as another mixed race person,
Yeah.
does that add any element to this discussion and not really having a foot in one culture or another?
Oh my God, we're like sisters. We got separated at birth. Yeah, great question. So I was asked if my perspective as a multiracial person, like how does that kind of swirl around with this discussion? And yeah, I mean, okay, so first of all, being mixed race can be tricky because you're basically a natural ambassador, but you don't belong to anybody. But I find it to be a huge asset because we have to think about that, right? So he wasn't mixed race, but Anthony Bourdain, I always was impressed by how he treated cultures that he went into and what he did as a writer and a journalist. Like, and his rule, his navigating question was like, you're in someone else's house. If you're in grandma's house, right? If grandma serves you something, you eat it, right? And he, I always thought, did a beautiful job of elevating the communities that he was in. But I think it has been, being mixed race has been you feel a little bit lonely a lot of the times, but it does give me a little bit of a window because I like helping people feel seen. And I do, I mean, we haven't talked as much on the appreciation side, but like, y'all, culture's amazing. Like, there's amazing food out there, and dance, and art, and stories. I mean, raise your hand if you like stories, right? It's amazing. Our brains are wired to remember stories. Our brains are wired to create all these wonderful neurochemicals when we hear stories. It's how we transmit information from generation to generation before we had the internet and all this cool stuff. And language can be this extraordinary vector. It can communicate bad things like biases, but it can also be a vehicle for us to communicate good things, like what values are important to us by the choices that we make in language and in how we elevate culture and things that are sacred. But yeah.
Hi. So I'm a college student, and I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is one of the most segregated cities in America. And on top of that, I go to an engineering school, so it's literally 80% white male. And it's really sad because I can count on my hands how many black people we have and how many Hispanic people. And they've done a lot of work with like National Society of Black Engineers, and we just got a Black Student Union. But I'm trying to figure out how you mentioned like the white cisgender men need to stay and be the ones that are like driving equity. I'm trying to figure out how we can do that, because at like an org fair, or people say like, oh, like, can I join Black Student Union even though I'm not Black? And I'm just like, yes, like, don't you want to advocate for humans? So it's just really difficult. Like, on top of being in a segregated city, our college is even like very segregated.
Yeah, but you're doing the work, so that's awesome, right? You're helping people find a way in.
No, as someone that's like a woman of color and a woman, sometimes it's very easy to feel like you're at a double disadvantage. But again, the point is you need to engage, and you need to not be afraid of advocating for what you're trying to achieve.
And that's not the problem. I'm also like a first gen, and I'm Middle Eastern, and there's one other person who's also Persian like I am. And I'm trying to figure out just like how I can let people know that it's okay to be an ally. Because people just do their own thing and don't really worry about others. How you kind of mentioned about how this country thinks we're all individuals, so they just worry about themselves when they don't understand that they have this privilege to make so much change for others. So how do we do that, at least maybe at the collegiate level or K through 12 student?
So I always trick people into like realizing that they actually care about like my issue. So like a lot of times when we start off a meeting, I'll say, AJC is a black woman-led organization. But just because we're black-led doesn't mean that it's not room for you. And then I ask people just simple, like, do you care about, making sure our prisons are empty? Do you care about making sure that women get paid, right, equally for the same work that male counterparts are doing? Do you care about marriage rights and stuff like that? And then when I get them to lean in with that, I just pull out the stats. Because all the stats show that, again, everything that I just said affects people of color, right? So, and I will say this, and I don't know if anybody agrees with me, you have to be okay with walking in your truth and your identity, right? I'm not gonna take any ounce of my blackness away to make some white boy or white girl feel safe. Like, either they're gonna accept my truth, they're gonna accept my struggle, and like we can learn in that, we can move in love through that, which is hard sometimes, or you can go join you can join ACLU or something that makes you feel a little bit more safe. But if you're gonna be a part of my black woman-led organization, you have to come in and respect our struggle, our voice, our pain, and our movement, right? So I think it's a way to do both. I think it's a way to make people feel comfortable and also be comfortable in yourself, because to me, that's the most important part. Being comfortable in the work that you do for your community and walking in your truth, right? And I can talk to you more after.
Okay, thank you.
Kind of the opposite. I live in Miami, and I'm Hispanic, and then there's a lot of Hispanics in Miami. I am dating a white boy from Broward, which is like 10 miles away. At some point he was trying to be a firefighter, and I kind of joke with him. I'm like, oh, like you're never gonna get hired. I'm a woman and I'm Hispanic. I'm gonna get hired in a second. It sucks, but it was the truth.
Oh,
Did you get the job? Oh.
No, I was just joking because he was struggling, and like one of the departments where they started saying, yeah, we're gonna hire more Hispanics, more Black people, but he's like, well, like I'm good, like why am I not? So my question
yeah.
is, how do I make him still feel included? How, because he has no, I mean, he is evil. Like,
Yeah.
but it's awesome because I've learned a lot from him and he's learned a lot from me.
Yeah.
How do we not make them feel like they're animals?
Right, so the question is, how do we make our white folks, allies, friends, feel included, right, when they may not feel included? As it happens, I am married to a very lovely white North Texan man who's sitting right over there. And I would definitely say that, you have these difficult conversations, or sometimes, whatever, just conversations, right? Like, and I'm going to take the appreciation, because it's in the title, I'm going to take this route. So like, My beloved spouse over there, Michael, sorry I'm calling you out, but like he loves fish sauce more than I do, and I'm half Asian. Like there's actually like he loves fermenting things. He makes really good kimchi. Like we've had some Korean grandmothers actually approve his kimchi, so I'm doing pretty good. But I think finding ways to create experiences, I think, is part of it, where they can respectfully enter in and understand and be a part of that culture, and make space for it. I don't know. That's a tricky question, right? Oh, in media.
When it's personal, we just kind of joke around. It's fine. Like he loves my mom's cooking. Like
Nice.
it's fine. It's more about when we're watching shows, when we're listening to the analysts, when we see Black Lives Matter, when we see Black, like he's like, why is there an X? I ask questions too about Black Lives Matter, everything. That's kind of like sometimes I feel like certain things that we're hearing can make us feel excluded.
Yep.
Or like we are matter for certain things, you know, it's
Yeah, Tanya, that sounds like a question for you, right? Like, how does the media help make sure we keep all voices kind of?
You know, there's a lot of media companies now have writers that focus on you know, different communities, and I guess that's a way of pushing the envelope forward. I'm not quite sure what your question was.
it's just how I work like a multinational agency as well. And so we know the Hispanic value and things like that, but it's like just sometimes when you see and I know you want to say something because I mentioned Black Lives Matter. And it's honestly common questions like why when people say all lives matter, why is that? And I understand. But I still want to kind of know because some people don't, or like, how do you explain that to not make people feel isolated?
All right. So you said your partner is gringo, right? Like white. I think it's a good book for him to read. It's called White Like Me by Tim Wise.
That's a great book.
I think that's a really good book for him to read because I'm not getting paid for this, so I can tell you how I feel. I don't think it's your job, privilege, or duty as a woman of color to make your white partner, white cisgender man, feel comfortable about his body that exudes so much privilege. I think, and you know, I say that very carefully because you know I think it's this weird, like, because I do believe we're all connected, but some of us have had so much privilege in this world, and they've seen themselves so much in this world that he has to be comfortable with not being at the front or feeling the best all the time, and uplifting you and your identity and other people, right? So I think he has to probably unpack what sounds like some toxic masculinity himself, and ask himself why he feels like that. Because, baby, that's not your job. That's not your job to make that white boy feel better about anything. Because he can literally go out and do whatever he wanted to do. Because his world, the current world we live in, is made for him. So I think he just has to be comfortable with being uncomfortable with the way our society is shifting, if that makes any sense.
Well, you're saying that the current world is made for him. However, this encounters things that, like we were just talking about, inclusion. That's excluding. It's not excluding. We can participate in that if we want to.
So,
Okay, so we are over time. I think, how about this? I knew this was probably going to happen at some point, but how about this? We will clear
one last
this
question.
area.
One last question.
One last question.
Really quickly, one last question.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to go back to, I appreciate you so much, Chaz, in the nonprofit sphere where our business case is equity. So I think it's different than talking about media and all these things. It's literally the unequal outcomes that make up what we do. As a black woman, as a woman of color, I do feel like in Austin, I'm in higher demand, I'm very mobile. But when I see an organization that doesn't have black women
So I actually might have semi-answer to that. So I do think, contrary to, I know that we've had some like really passionate discussions around this, but I do think, and the other lady that had talked about being an engineer and being one of the only women, I think sometimes you make change happen by doing. Sometimes it's not just about sitting on a panel being kind of, forthright with everything, but like you are a beacon. You yourself are a model for what you represent in your situation, right? So if I'm the only Asian American at my agency, which sometimes has happened in my past, like I look at that as an opportunity to show them like what I am made out of and what I can do. And to me, sometimes it's nuance. It's over time in which you start to demonstrate that there is room for people like me at this table, and this is why. And then you start bringing people in yourself. Like you had said, sometimes you have to be the co-conspirator and just sneak people in the side door, and then you keep building on like that. And I do think that there's some truth to that as well, as being really calculated about it. It's unfortunate that it has to be like that sometimes, but I do believe that once you start that, and once you start that conversation, and you start opening yourself to having that conversation and bringing thoughts to the table of, this is very advertising focused, but when we do creative briefs, let's talk about how we make sure that we include at least 3 or 4 people in this conversation, in this brainstorm that typically won't be at this table. Little things like that where you start changing the culture in a very tactical way can create larger shifts for the long term in my brain.
I feel like you were asking a different question though, which is the revolving door thing. And so I just want to highlight that though, is that in and of itself is a very important signal that I think organizations need to spend more time thinking about, right? If you cannot retain your diverse staff, that sends in and of itself a signal, right? So when Bazoma left Uber, that told me something, right? That told me something about their real commitment to diversity. So, and I think too, I'm a different type of journalist. I write for Forbes. It's a little bit different, but as a contributor. But this is something that, I wrote about the apologies that these companies might issue forth. And so it's like, are those apologies really authentic to the culture of that organization if their top executives who are people of color are leaving? So I think what you pointed out is a really important metric.
Great. I think it's time to wrap, but obviously there's a lot of conversations happening, so feel free to stop any of us after the panel. Thank you so much.